Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate that. I'll ask this to all witnesses today. It's almost 10 years to the day after the fateful announcement by Lois Lerner of the IRS that the agency was disfavoring groups when granting tax-exempt status. While Congress has passed language on a bipartisan basis each year since 2013 to prevent another Lois Lerner situation, it's time to make those protections permanent. Would you agree? Start with you, Ms. Dillon, yes or no?
Yes, sir, I do agree.
Ms. Martin?
I do agree, yes.
Mr. Raymer?
I do, yes.
Mr. Smith? Mr.
501c4s should not be vehicles for dark money in our elections.
So you agree?
Well, I agree that 501c4s have been abused, particularly after Citizens United, to
Do you
form
agree
dark
or
money
disagree?
arms
I'm
of
just trying to get a
super
yes
PACs.
or no.
I believe that 501c4s
So I'm
have
going
an
to take that as a
important
no
role to
unless
play
you,
to promote social welfare.
unless you say yes, I'm taking it as a no, okay?
What they shouldn't be
All right.
is
I-
avenues to cloak dark money
I'll
and
move
spending.
on to the
They
next
need to-
question.
They should be promoting social welfare.
Mr. Raymer, I'm going to agree with you because you said it in your opening statement, but I had it written down as a question, so I'm going to rearrange it a little bit. But state parties are the most highly regulated organizations in the political sphere. We have so severely limited how they can operate that in some states they barely exist. And I agree with you that we should remove restrictions on state parties that don't make sense and put state parties on a solid footing to be able to organize voters and support their candidates without the heavy weight of the federal government. And I say that having been a 17-year member of the Virginia State Central Committee of the Republican Party. And so, you know, I saw a lot of this happening over time. That being said, I note in the ACE Act, so I'd like to get your thoughts on this, that it looks like even in the ACE Act, the penalties are higher on a state and local party that violate the rules, but the penalties are higher than they are on a foreign national who violates the rules. Do you think that's right?
And I'm not familiar with that particular provision, Congressman, but I mean, the fact of the matter is these state and local organizations have a hard enough time paying any FEC enforcement fees or anything like that. I mean, it's very difficult for them. They don't have much money to begin with. And so I think the punishment should be reflective of the infraction. And I think oftentimes it's not.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I think you touched on this in your opening as well. A lot of times, particularly with the local party officials, they're just doing the best job they can. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some kind of a sanction if they violate the rules, but it ought to be rational and based on what their mental state was and whether or not it was something they were doing to play games, to try to do things they weren't supposed to do, or whether it was a mere fact that they just didn't understand and it was confusing. And I think you stated, and you can elaborate more, that we need to make these laws and rules related to local and state parties easy to understand so they don't inadvertently cross some tripwire.
Absolutely, Congressman. As I've mentioned, the state parties are the most regulated entity, and they have to deal with this sort of Venn diagram of federal and state law and having to comply with both. And at the RNC, we really don't have to do that. We're basically a federal committee, and it's regulated by federal law, but the states have to deal with both. And even where those two things come together, there's all sorts of blurry lines, and it's almost impossible for them. And I can tell you that in dealing with dozens of state and local parties over the years, that any FEC issues that I have seen, non-compliance or whatever, have been out of maybe a lack of sophistication, inability to hire expert compliance people, attorneys to get them through this stuff. It's difficult.
And that's why I suspect you would favor having a legal fund for the state parties and a building fund, one, so that they can be better educated and prepared for the rules and regulations that are reasonable, and two, if anybody's been to the Obenshain building in the last 10 years, which is for those who don't know, it's the state party headquarters in Virginia, there are parts of it I'm not sure are safe anymore. Would you agree with that?
I agree with you, Congressman. I've been in many state party headquarters across the country, and well, I don't need to say anymore. They're in rough shape.
But you would agree that having a building fund and a legal fund would both benefit the following of the law and benefit the state parties, even to a minimal extent of keeping their property in a better fashion.
Absolutely. There's no reason why you shouldn't allow the state parties to have these additional accounts. They're not being used for TV ads. They're not being used for anything that needs to be further regulated. And litigation has become a much bigger concern on both sides of the aisle, whether it's them being sued for something or needing to hire compliance attorneys. So I think it's absolutely a great idea.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.